The major support for this lecture comes from the Kripke Center for the Study of Religion and Society. Ron Simpkins, who is the director, along with a lot of other theology faculty, is at the annual meeting of the Society of Biblical Literature, which is in Atlanta, where I was until this afternoon. And so he saw he can't be here this evening. Of course, the Kripke Center is partly sponsored by the university and partly sponsored by a very generous gift from Rabbi Kripke. So a good example of the cooperation that exists between the Jewish community and the Creighton community. The lecture is also sponsored by the Clustick Chair, which I hold, and by the Creighton College of Arts and Sciences. In addition, the lecture series is held in connection with class, and right now I'm teaching a class in Holocaust Studies, and that lecture and the class that goes with it is supported by the Heartland Holocaust Education Fund, with special thanks to Mr. and Mrs. Sam Freed. And this particular lecture has the additional sponsorship of Partnership with Israel. The Jewish community in Omaha, like many Jewish communities in the country, has a partnership with portions of Israel, in our cases with the Western Galilee. And it is thanks to them that we're able to host tonight Dr. Boaz Cohen. And Dr. Cohen, you said, did he come from Israel just to talk to us? And I'm sure he would have. As it happens, you spent, 3 days in Texas? Is that right? 3 days in Texas? And Chicago. He's moving up. No, I won't go there about Texas, because some people actually like it. Dr. Cohen received his PhD from Bar Ilan University, which is one of Israel's leading institutions of higher learning, and now teaches at a new college, about a decade old, called the Western Galilee Academic College, where he heads their program in Holocaust Studies. You can get a good sense of his interests from some of the articles that he's published. One of the earliest, The Birth Pangs of Holocaust Research in Israel, that how you would imagine how important the Holocaust and Holocaust studies would be for the people of Israel. And some of the articles that he's written dealing with our topic tonight include And I Was Only a Child, Children's Testimonies from Bergen-Belsen in 1945, The Children's Voice, Post-War Collection of Testimonies from children survivors of the Holocaust, and Representing Children's Holocaust, Children's Survivor Testimonies, published in a particular publication in the late 40s. And he's a pioneer in the study of how these testimonies were taken and the conditions under which they were taken and what we can learn from them. As a result of which, he has helped put a human face on Holocaust research and commemoration. When we think of 6 million, that's of course a huge number. We also have to think that each one of these 6 million was an individual. And so I ask you to join me in welcoming Dr. Boaz Cohen, who will be speaking on listening to child survivors in the aftermath of the Holocaust.
Okay, I'll just say a special thank you to all the students who came. I teach students, and they don't always come for extra lectures, so I really appreciate it. Thank you, and also for the rest of the public. Because we have a varied audience, I'll speak about as some general stuff at the beginning, and then I'll go on to talk about the testimonies themselves. First, I'll say, how many Jewish children do we find in Europe after the Holocaust? Or we can ask it another way. What is the survival rate of Jewish children during the Holocaust? So I'll say this. The general survival rate of Jewish children in Europe during World War II is something like 11%. And only 11% of Jewish children made it through the war, which is an understatement. in the heart of Nazi occupation in Poland, we talk of a survival rate of 3%, meaning only 3% of Jewish children in Poland made it to the end of the war, which makes something like 28,000 children, most of which survived because they were either expelled or escaped to the inner reaches of the Soviet Union. And we have about 5,000 children who survived in hiding in Poland. Now, this is out of something like 900,000 children, so these numbers are really small. What I will do today is we will hear from the children who survived, which means we obviously don't have much, or certainly not survivor testimonies from most of the Jewish children who suffered who died under Nazi rule. So we have some sort of a voice for those who survived, and what I want to talk about today is how this voice came about. So the war ends. Now the war doesn't end in one day. This is something when we live so many years after that, we know VE Day, Victory in Europe Day, so and so. But from each town, the war ended at another time. I mean, if the Red Army takes from 43 to 45 to reach Berlin, on the way it liberates, sometimes it liberates and goes back. So you have liberated Jews coming out of the hiding and then caught by the German army when it counterattacks. But we have this gradual liberation. We already have Eastern Poland in 44 with some sort of enemy administration, and this goes on until we reach Berlin, and that's the end. But so we have some sort of gradual liberation. This is one thing. Another thing is to understand that when we talk about children, it's very hard to say who's a child. I mean, that's the seminal question for everyone who talks about children in the Holocaust. For example, in our research, and which I'll talk about later, is how do you define a child? And we have to understand that the Holocaust was different for a child in Poland who in 39, in Western Poland, who in 39 was under Nazi rule until late 44. So we're talking something like a 5-year Holocaust, a 5-year duration where he has to survive, and on the other hand, a Jewish child in Hungary who has a very concise and brutal Holocaust of half a year. So we have so when the Polish child was 9 years old, when the occupation started, and he got to be 13 or 14-year-old towards the end, the parallel Jewish-Hungarian child only then really started this terrible odyssey. I'm not downplaying anything. I'm just saying that the timeline is different. We made a very, like researchers, we have to decide. We decided that 1930, born 1930, that is our timeline. Meaning, children born 1930 were either children during the Holocaust and teenagers when it ended, or they were young, very young children and older children when it ended. So the material I'm talking about today, the liberated children, are anywhere between. What do you do with these children? When no, before that I'll say something else. I was in a panel now in a conference in Chicago, social studies historians. We were talking about children in conflict. Actually, children always get hurt because of adult people's conflicts. This is a fact. I mean, if you bomb a town, the children get hurt. If their parents go to war and die, children always get hurt in war. I mean, there isn't any other option. But children, what the Jews during the Holocaust suddenly understood, and it took people until today maybe to understand, that this was not about children hurt as collateral damage. This was about these children being targeted to die. And this is something written in the ghetto by Emanuel Ringelblum. You have an amazing exhibition about him in the Jewish Center later on this year. He was an historian in the ghetto, and he writes 1942 is the deadliest year in human history. We're talking about something like 3.5 million Jews murdered in 1942. It's the worst year in the history of the 20th century, or maybe of human modern history. We're talking about millions of people killed, murdered, not dying in battle in 1942. 3.5 million of the 6 million Jews were killed in 1942. So this is when they start understanding what's going on. He says, they were chronicling the ghetto. This was their legacy for the future. They were chronicling everything possible. They were all historians or economists and educators. They were just chronicling, putting everything in big tin boxes, which were found after the Holocaust. 2 people from this group survived. He says, we're going to get news of murder of Jewish children and seniors. This is no precedent in Jewish history, apart from Pharaoh. We don't know of any precedent like that. On the contrary, children were always left alive in order to enable their conversion. I mean, when Jewish adult communities were killed, the kids were taken off to be converted, whether to Christianity or Islam. But in the Holocaust, suddenly there's a new reality. And the reality is, it says, even in the dark Middle Ages, there was a spark of humanity in the hearts of the killers who spared babies. But this is not the case with the Nazis. What we have here is children targeted to die. And when you hear how much effort is put into what they call Judenjagd, chasing Jews, hunting Jews in the woods. I mean, German police units will go, they'll have this, orders of the day. Platoon number 3 goes on Jugendhagen, goes to hunt Jews in the forest. I mean, these were children who were meant to die, targeted to die. They didn't have any better chance than the adults because they were supposed to die just as the adults. And one of the things that people understand, and it takes them a long time to understand, that the Germans don't spare children. Because, I mean, humanly, you expect people to spare children. I don't know why, but in all civilizations, killing a child is seen some sort of abomination. I mean, something that is not to be done. But the Germans had, I mean, the Jewish children were targeted to die just as Jewish adults. And even because they were moving around in the countryside or in the streets of Warsaw, they were even more targeted to die than others. So the war ends sometime, and people start looking for Jewish children. Sorry, I meant this one. This is Fredzia. You can see this is an album picture. I've got the English translation, which will be down on the slide. It says Fredzia student. It's student we know now. Age 11 from Gorshikov. It's a small village in Galicia. I took her from the Tukevicza. The rest of the wording is Tukevicza convent. She was in a convent which saved a lot of Jewish children. And she was, after the war, Jewish activists were going around and search. If they were searching for family members, was one, and searching for generally Jewish children. Many of the convents would, I can say as a rule, convents in Poland would hand Jewish children to family members, but were less enthusiastic if there was no family member around. I mean, this kid she got 4 years of. Before she ran like a hunted animal in the forest, being chased by Polish kids and SS, and seeing her mother killed before her eyes, and hiding in a small hole in a granary, in a barn under the hay. Before that, after all this experience, she gets to a convent. And she's not the only Jewish child in the convent, though she is made to take communion. But when someone comes and says that she has a family member alive, they allow her to leave. And this didn't happen. We can say that convents in Poland always return children to family members, but we're not enthusiastic about returning Jewish children to Jews in the general. I mean, you have to have a family member, and then they'll be fair with you. But it was harder if you didn't have one. Anyway, she's 12 years old, this girl. She's now older. She had a wonderful life. She's married.